Good morning. Greg, thank you very much for the very timely and relevant remarks. My name's Howard Marshall. I'm with Accenture Security. Prior to that, though, I spent 22 years with the FBI. And I'm going to start this morning by thanking Don Upson. Honored and privileged to be here. Don, I think this relationship with the FBI started about 4 years ago. We met actually here at this conference, and it became very clear to me that the GBEF represented the perfect intersection between government and business. And I've been incredibly proud to be there when it started. I was honored then, and I'm honored now. So Don, thank you very much for the opportunity to continue to participate. I want to start by a bit of an interesting twist to the next guest. I've known our next guest for more than a decade now. Job of an FBI agent is a very dangerous one. We've got a lot of enemies, foreign domestic enemies, terrorists, bank robbers, criminals, kidnappers, all kinds of terrible people. But our next guest probably had the scariest job in the Hoover building that one could possibly have. For the longest time, I knew him as the assistant director of the finance division. And if you think you had enemies as an FBI agent, try spending $9 billion American taxpayer dollars. This is a gentleman who never had a lack of help, to say the least, and a very high-pressure, high-stress job. But I know him a little bit differently. I met our next guest like I said, more than a decade ago, and our careers bounced back and forth and intersected several times. But I know our next guest is a baseball coach. And that's important to know him because I got a chance to see him in a different light. A lot of FBI executives, a lot of government executives have that kind of responsibility, approach life differently. They do things differently. They don't have a whole lot of time for anybody else. I know our next guest as a very kind, very passionate, very caring individual. And I think when people get to know him that way and see him, they begin to understand a little bit more about how he touches the organization and what he does for it. He's a gentleman that is always behind the scenes, but prescient in just about every big decision the organization has made. You may have heard a couple years ago the FBI was moving. Guess who was at the center of that conversation? Do not judge his success or failure based on the fact that we're still in the same place. Herculean project. But I know our next guest to be just a wonderful person. I'm proud to continue to have a relationship with him, and even prouder today to get a chance to introduce him to you. Our next guest is Executive Assistant Director of the FBI, Rich Haley.
In color. Starring Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.
The core mission remains, but has been expanded to include new missions: cybercrime, counterterrorism, intelligence collection and analysis. This is not your father's FBI. After a distinguished career as a military intelligence officer and budget and finance executive in the Department of Justice, Rich Haley joined the FBI in 2005 as Deputy Chief Financial Officer. 3 years later, he was promoted to Chief Financial Officer and given expanded responsibilities to include budget, procurement, financial operations, and facilities. In June 2019, Rich Haley was promoted and serves today as Executive Assistant Director for Information and Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the government keynote for CES Government 2020, Rich Haley.
Good morning. How we doing? I want to thank Howard for that introduction. I did get a chance this past summer. Both of our sons were headed off to college, so I got to actually coach Howard's son, which was quite the treat. I did notice the jeans Howard's wearing. That was not acceptable about 18, 20 months ago when he was in the FBI. You can see how that happens after retirement. I'll have to report that back when I get back to Hoover. It's great to be here. I want to thank, I got to meet Greg before the before the event and really appreciated his comments and actually was taking note of some of those. I also want to recognize the fact, the honor of following General Kelly. In my previous office, on the wall in the front of the room, we had 2 speeches blown up. One about 4 feet, so the font was quite big. We made all new employees read them. One on the left side was from Admiral McCraven, and it's Make Your Bed speech that he gave to University of Texas. And on the right was the speech that General Kelly gave in 2013 in San Antonio on Memorial Day, where he talks about sacrifice and service for the country. And it's a pretty phenomenal speech and just a real hero and honor to follow him this morning. What a difference a year makes. Last year, my peer, recently retired Executive Assistant Director Amy Hess was supposed to be here. They had her all geared up to talk to an automated robot, and the government was shut down. And I was the one that had to tell Amy she couldn't travel because we have no money. So ironically, here we are a year later, and fortunately we have a budget, and I could pay for the train fare and cab ride over here. So it's great to be here. As I had, and as you heard, 15 years doing the finance and acquisitions and facilities. I have about 3 years to retire, so I thought I had built my little empire and I was going to sit back and enjoy that. And I got a call from the deputy asking to come over and do this job. But those are kind of the ones you don't get to say yes or no. It's just, okay, when do you want me to start? And so in the previous job, and I'm going to talk about partnerships among other things, but in the previous role in finance and facilities at the FBI, the person that brought me over to the FBI had been the lead investigator with Enron back in the day, had done a number of other white-collar crime cases, and had mentioned when I first started that with the FBI, with all of our business lines, 30 divisions, multiple operational components in the organization, that we're more like a corporate entity, like a Procter & Gamble or a General Electric. And we should benchmark and work with private sector partners equally or even more, at least in our area, than some of our government partners. And over the years, taking that to heart, we've had the opportunity to meet with over 50 different companies, with CEOs, CFOs, the facilities. We've got to visit amazing places out in Silicon Valley, in New York, down in Texas, other places overseas. And on the government side, we've also been able to really take that aspect. Howard talked about the new headquarters building, which is kind of in a delay right now, a freeze, I'll call it. But we were able to partner in almost like a kid brother to NATO, as NATO was building their headquarters over in Belgium, and also other major companies like Apple and others that have gone through that. And I can tell you from that experience, being able to talk to the best in different industries. So I'm a big believer. Partnership is one of the director's 4 pillars. But from a business side, that partnerships to me are critically important. Entities that can do things better than we can, we should go get that. And that's important in an FBI context because the organization's roots, going back to Director Hoover, was you thought about it in the FBI, you built it in the FBI, and it stayed in the FBI. So in an organization, especially post 9/11, in terms of our ability to share across the different lanes. So I come into this job back in July. It's been 6 months this week, so you're getting at me at the 6-month anniversary. I like to call it 13 fortnights. That Shakespearean thing sounds a little cooler, so that's how I... one of the first encounters I had was with our cyber assistant director, who's been a friend for a while, but he came up to me and he said, "Rich, you're my biggest brand risk." And I looked at him, and you think about what our cyber division does, what CyWatch does within the FBI, how we partner DHS and other components. And similar to my role on the finance side, where we are trying to pass audits each year, and our investigators are investigating financial fraud on Wall Street and other financial frauds. If we fail our financial statement, what does that look like in terms of us out holding others accountable? And can we be above reproach? And similarly, in this role, how do we make sure that at an enterprise level that we don't have the attacks and some of the stuff that Greg was talking about earlier happening to us when we're out coordinating and working with other entities, not just in the state, local, federal, international side, but also in the private sector side. And so looking at that and coming over into this role, and again, I think there's a little bit of punishment here for all the times that I've told the IT people that they couldn't have more money or more things. It's hitting a landscape within the FBI where we have, those of you that aren't familiar with the organization, we do most of our work at the secret side. We call it the red side. We don't have SCIFs all over the country, all over the world, so we do most of our stuff at the secret side. So we have this vast network and applications that we work on secret. But because of our partners, private sector, state and local, we have this unclassified enclave as well. And then obviously with our IC partners, we have our TS enclave. So you're trying to run 3 enclaves across 37,000 employees, another 20+ thousand contractors, 56 field offices, 350 locations across the country, 70 to 80 locations globally. And it seems like it should be okay or easy to say, okay, let's invest here or let's invest in this other area. But we have a legacy drain. We are spending our resources below the waterline on all these activities and all these legacy systems and networks. And so how do you go forward with investing in new capabilities, new technology, whether it be AI, machine learning, or other things? And so that's somewhat of the dilemma that we seriously find ourselves in, that $9 billion, soon to be $10 billion, probably next year's budget. And I used to have this conversation with Director Mueller. That was my experience with really close-to-close combat with a Marine as an Army guy for 9 years. Got to really know what it was like to work with a Marine. But we would start out saying, sir, here's your budget. And he would look at that and say, okay, I can spend all that money. No, 60, 70% of that's going to personnel. Another 20% of that's going to fixed cost, rents, and other things. So by the time we got done with his budget at the time, it was probably $6-7 billion when he retired, or when he left. He had about $30 million that he could put towards other activities. And so a big challenge for us, and this is this engagement, again, with partners, is how do we do that better? And when I say partners, there's also partners inside. I talked about our cyber division relationship. I'll mention more about that in a second. But we have parts of the FBI that does a very good job at technology, at advancing capabilities. Our CESG facility out in West Virginia, where we do fingerprints, 99% accuracy in identifying fingerprints in hundreds of millions of situations each year, where they do the gun checks that all of us are familiar with. Our lab division, which does our DNA testing, which is becoming more and more mobile, and within the next couple of years, being able to do instant DNA testing. And so how do we leverage off of these other parts of the organization? Our operational technology division, which does our surreptitious entries and poll cameras, and is really advancing forward. Historically, our enterprise capabilities and requirements have not married up or partnered with our internal operational capabilities. And with the limited resources that we have, how do we bring that together? How do we work with those capabilities? And then I mentioned our cyber division. Cyber, and with these blended threats, when you see nation-state actors using criminals to perform many of these attacks that are occurring, it's not just our lines of business working individually, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, weapons of mass destruction, criminal. It's all of them at any given time working in these hybrid threats. And cyber division, being a partner, and one of the things Matt, our assistant director, has really articulated in on me is that you've got this unique situation where our victims are here in the United States. You've got the adversaries or the perpetrators most of the time or oftentimes overseas using our infrastructure to commit these crimes and commit these cyber attacks. And so who owns that? You've got 90% of the critical infrastructure in the private sector. DHS obviously has a huge part of that in terms of defending the infrastructure. The DoD and IC components having that adversary overseas touch point, and then the FBI in the middle of that with both the national security and law enforcement capabilities. And so from an enterprise perspective in this role is how do we look at what's happening in cyber? Our former director used to say, Bonnie and Clyde, on a good day with the wind behind them, speeding on a highway could rob 2 banks. And today you can hit multiple institutions over a few minutes for tens and $20 million, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so how do we look at that? In the McVeigh case, I see one of our former executives here in the audience. We talked about when we were developing our case management system, when McVeigh committed the bombing 25 years ago, you had agents going out to hotel after hotel trying to figure out what his course was to get to Oklahoma. And when all that material was taken in, all those notes and 302s, they were put in boxes, they were put on crates, and they were stuck in a warehouse. And today, all that information is in the cloud, is in our data centers, it's in our electronic storage. How do we access it? How do we make sure that it's not being attacked? Has U.S. citizens' information in it? How do we make sure that it's not being compromised or getting out? And so those are some of the challenges that from the operational side, moving into how does the enterprise, and I fear where we're at, that we're falling behind. We don't have the resources, as mentioned earlier in the DoD slides, in terms of how do we spend when we have this limited amount of resources to make a difference going forward in a very expensive endeavor. And I think that's that broader partnership. We should not be spending resources that other government agencies are doing. How do we partner with them? One example of an asymmetrical, our normal partners are law enforcement, our IC partners. We are, thanks to some of the congressional support that was mentioned, and it's not necessarily one of the bubbles that matches up with the tech savvy area, but we've been given about $1.5 billion to move to Huntsville, Alabama. We are going to move a large portion of our our personnel out of the Washington, D.C. area. As Amazon's moving into D.C., we're getting the heck out. Home prices are going up. Traffic's getting worse. I live in Arlington. But Huntsville presents a unique opportunity for us. In addition to Materiel Command, which has a huge presence globally in terms of supply chain and moving things around, which we've partnered with, you have Missile Command, and you have NASA. And these are not our typical partners, government partners, but when NASA looks at how do they move data back and forth from Mars back to the Earth, and you take away the scientific piece of that, and we look at how do we move data from a crime scene. The shooting here in Las Vegas, from that shooting, we ended up from cameras and from phones and other devices over a petabyte of data. And we don't have the network capability to move that size data. Boston, similar, El Paso, each one of these shootings or incidents are creating these large amounts of data. So we use our G5 to move data across the country today. And so how do we leverage on partnerships, especially in the private sector, to get better at what I call the managed services that we currently don't do a good enough job at in terms of working with commercial networks and others, where I cannot spend enough money, but I can leverage off of that. So in addition to managed services that tie to that partnership, the other area that we're really focused on is mobility. And when I look at mobility, if you think about agents who 13,000 or so agents, which are the tip of the spear. It's the reason why we exist at the FBI, putting their lives on the line every day. And then after they go out and do their investigation, we require them to come back to a desk in a building and type up their notes, type up their 302s. So how do we untether them from a wall or from having to do that in the mobility? And it's hard because we do work on these different enclaves, and most of our stuff is going into secret systems. And how do we make sure we have evidence controls, we have chain of custody. So it's not like, well, just put them out with a laptop. It does require additional requirements. And that's one of the things, again, whereas I look at our opportunities to leverage off of others, we have a new set of device coming, which gives us some of that initial mobility. It's a second or third generation, which takes some of the technology a little more advanced than the F-16 picture that was shown earlier, but some of the technology that DoD is using and giving us that into a secure package that gets us closer to that mobility. The other area is automation. We're an investigative organization. One of the things that I'm always amazed when I go out to the tech companies is a tech company operates and thinks and works like a tech company. As much as we integrate and bring more technology into the FBI, we're still an investigative shop. We're still a government shop. And how do we think more like a tech company in terms of how we're doing things in automation, that it doesn't take 10 additional positions do on a keyboard what we can do through automation. And then data analytics. We've created additional positions with data analysts, computer scientists, but just recently up in Boston, visiting one of the Air Force facilities up there and also up the National Lab. And they talk about janitors. We hire these computer scientists and data analysts, and then we give them a broom and we make them clean up the mess. And so they spend 70 or 80% of their time cleaning up the data instead of exploiting the data or being able to get the data in a format that can get to an agent or get to an intel analyst so they can actually do the work. So those are some of the challenges that we're going through, and as we go forward, trying to put together. The director talks repeatedly about innovation and agility and what do we need to do in this tech space. And it's one of the areas where, again, in this role, excited to come in. I can maybe check in with you in a year and tell you how it's going. But really in terms of being able to take these innovation areas and move forward. So it's groups like this, it's individuals and persons like yourselves that are interested in this area. I'm collecting a large, what I call, it's not PC, I can't call it graybeards anymore because a number of them are females, so I have to come up with a better term of, several of them are in the room here, like Luke McCormick, who was a CIO at the department, and DHS, bringing back these experts that can help guide us along with our other partners. One of the things that Matt talks about, our Assistant Director of Cyber, is this convergence. And so where we had these different capabilities, where you talk about cloud or 5G or automation or AI, how these are all converging into a seamless threat capability. And it makes it more difficult from the operational side. What these innovations, which are good for us and good for us to be able to exploit in our lives and in our companies and what we're doing from a mission space, also are out there with the adversaries. And as this convergence is occurring, how are we going to defend ourselves and protect ourselves? Drones are amazing tools for us in terms of crime scene support, what we do to protect or help on our raids, not having to send people through a door and things like that. But the drones are also creating challenges for us here in the homeland. We recently, last year, got new authorities and, along with DHS to be able to focus and attack the drones. We obviously can't do that as the military. We can't shoot a drone down over a football stadium or something. So using technology differently in terms of being able to take on some of these challenges like drones. And then I guess finally what I would say in terms of talent is how do we go about bringing in individuals that are excited. There's what I call the smell of arrest. We hire a lot of people at headquarters in the back office. A lot of them never get to go out to a field office. And when you take them out and the first time a legal warranted arrest that occurs and you see people in handcuffs that have done bad things to other individuals being arrested, there's a smell in the room. There's this connection that you feel like, wow, this is the FBI. This is where I want to work, protecting, thwarting terrorist attacks. And so how do we get people in the digital area, the computer areas, excited about coming to organizations like the FBI and many of our partners like DHS and in the IC to do these type of things? And one of the other areas, and we just brought on, we have a senior IT executive from one of the IT corporations that we're using special authorities with now, who comes in, we get him for about 150 days a year, where he comes into the organization and helps us on many of these applications and how are we going to move big data. How do we take data from the outside world, from an accounting firm or from an IT shop, and get it in to analyze it? How do we get it into our systems? How do we uplift it into our systems? So some of the exciting things that we're doing in our space, I really get excited when I see groups like this and what you're doing here, and I really look forward to working with many of you going forward. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.